Kira, the leader of the small clan known as the People of the River, moved with a controlled desperation. Her gait was low, her eyes scanning the immense landscape. A hunter's, a scavenger's, an inheritor's eyes. She carried a short, heavy club, and clutched in her other hand was her most precious possession. A stone chopper, a lava cobble cracked once, twice, expertly against an anvil stone, leaving a razor-sharp, jagged edge. This tool was the difference between a long life and a quick death. Behind her shuffled the clan. Zef, the strongest, whose back was scarred by the swipe of a cat from a previous season. Lee, the mother, tightly holding her 2-year-old, Kale, to her chest, and 3 others, a teenage male, a young mother, and the elder, whose wisdom was now a burden, requiring precious water, yet whose memory held the routes of safety. All were Australopithecus on the cusp of the great transition, upright, resilient, and utterly dependent on what they could find. They had spent the last 2 hours chasing the buzzards. But the trail led to disappointment. A desiccated zebra carcass, picked clean hours before by jackals and now merely a hide stretched over sun-bleached ribs. Kira knelt, sniffing the ground, nothing. No scraps of muscle, only the bitter taste of defeat. The clan's diet of tubers, berries, and occasional insect grubs was failing them. The plants offered bulk, but little fuel for the brain. The children were quiet, too quiet. The thin muscles in the arms of the men trembled. They needed meat, not just flesh, but the deep, white, fatty marrow locked inside the bones. The rich, concentrated energy that meant survival, warmth, and the power to think one step ahead of the vast, terrifying world. Kira rose, her eyes shifting not to the ground, but to the sky. Her face, framed by coarse, dark hair, was a mask of tense focus. A shift in the air, a movement miles distant, caught her attention. High, high above the distant copies, a black speck wheeled. Then another, and a third, dipping lower, tracing slow, concentric circles. This was not the idle flight of a lonely bird. This was a gathering, a focus. This was fresh death. Kira pointed, a short, sharp gesture toward the west. No words were needed. The clan understood. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of nervous energy. The scent of potential sustenance, even hours away, was a life-giver. The pace quickened to a relentless, ground-eating stride. They moved in silence, a single, close-knit unit, their low center of gravity allowing them to conserve energy while covering ground efficiently. They navigated the acacia scrub and the dry riverbeds, their eyes constantly sweeping the perimeter. In this land, the scavenger was often the prey. The buzzards grew larger, resolving into distinct forms, diving and swirling with greedy impatience. Beneath them, the air shimmered with the heat, but a dark stain upon the reddish earth promised salvation. Kira stopped dead, throwing up a hand. The clan froze instantly, melting into the shadows of a thorny bush line. The kill was immense. A young rhinoceros, perhaps, or a colossal buffalo, its massive shape half hidden in the tall, yellow grass. And, standing guard over the remnants was the secondary predator, the rival scavenger, a pack of spotted hyenas. There were 5 of them, brawny, low-slung, their shoulders rippling with the power to crush bone. They were snarling, tearing, and occasionally snapping at the frantic vultures attempting to land. This was the first twist, the first hard barrier. The hyenas were stronger, faster, and possessed jaws that made their stone tools seem crude by comparison. Direct confrontation was suicide. Kira surveyed the scene, her breathing shallow. The hyenas had ripped away the easy muscle, but the massive, armored limb bones remained, gnawed but intact. The treasure was locked inside. She nudged Zef, pointing to the largest hyena, which was dragging a heavy shank away from the main carcass. Zef understood the unspoken command. Distraction. They needed a split second, a window of chaos. Kira took the lead, keeping low to the ground. She signaled Zef and the young male to move wide, circling around the windward side to use the faint scent of the death and dust to their advantage. Lee and the others stayed hidden, their bodies pressed against the protective thorns. Zef, moving like a shadow, found a handful of dry, sharp stones. He waited until the dominant hyena had settled on its prize, its head lowered in a greedy, crunching concentration. With a sudden, explosive heave, ZF launched the stones. They struck the ground near the hyena's flank with a loud thwack thwack thwack. The hyena leaped back, startled, its ears pinned. It snarled, looking everywhere but at the concealed figures. Kira saw her chance. She burst from the cover, not running directly at the hyenas, but in a serpentine dash toward the largest, intact leg bone near the carcass. The sound of her sudden movement was like a gunshot in the silent heat. One of the hyenas, quicker than the rest, spotted her and started the charging sprint, its gait a grotesque, galloping lope. Kira did not slow down. She reached the bone, a femur thicker than her own torso, and with a grunt, wedged the sharp point of her chopper underneath it, trying to roll the massive weight. The charging hyena was 30 paces away, its teeth bared, saliva stringing from its jaws. The young male, following Kira's plan, now rushed the carcass from the other side, not to take meat, but to kick sand and throw dust onto the feeding hyenas. He succeeded in blinding 2 of them momentarily. This momentary chaos was all Kira needed. She gave one final, desperate push on the bone, rolling it just enough to dislodge it from the tangled ribs. With a burst of strength born of starvation, she dragged the bone, scraping it against the dirt, pulling it towards the protective cover. The charging hyena was now upon her. Kira dropped the bone, swung her club, and landed a solid blow on the hyena's muzzle. The sound was a dull, sickening thud. The animal yelped, momentarily stunned, shaking its head violently, its predatory focus broken. Kira grabbed the bone again. ZF and the young male rejoined her, and together they hauled the enormous prize backward, retreating at a desperate speed. The hyenas, recovering from the assault and distracted by the still-present scent of the main carcass, let them go. The risk of pursuing 3 determined hominids with clubs and sharp stones was not worth the trouble of a single, already gnawed bone. They retreated over a small ridge, stopping a long distance away, collapsing behind a low granite outcrop. The air was thick with panting. Sweat, dust, and blood not their own smeared their arms. But they had it, the prize. Kira wasted no time. Her fingers, calloused and strong, traced the fissures in her chopper. This was the moment the tool was truly born. She held the immense, heavy femur steady with her foot and her knee. ZF stood guard, his club ready, eyes scanning the horizon for the inevitable return of the rightful owners of the bone. Kira raised the chopper. The heavy lava rock required every ounce of her strength and focus. She brought it down with calculated force against the shaft of the femur. Crack! The sound echoed, thin and sharp, startling the surrounding wildlife. A tiny hairline fracture appeared. Again. Crack, crack. The muscle and sinew still clinging to the bone offered resistance. The rhythmic, determined blows continued, a primal drumming against the silence of the savanna. Each strike was a defiance of the natural order, a declaration that they would no longer wait for teeth or fire to access the world's richest nutrients. Finally, with a loud, splitting sound, the bone fractured lengthwise. A deep, creamy white cylinder of marrow was exposed. The smell was rich, fatty, and overwhelmingly good. It was the smell of life itself. Lee quickly retrieved a large, scoop-shaped piece of bone shard. Kira gestured to Kale first. Kale, silent and weak, watched with wide eyes as Lee carefully scooped a small dollop of the semi-solid fat. The child took it, his face registering pure, unadulterated relief as the high-calorie food hit his tongue. The clan ate, not in celebration, but with frantic, focused efficiency. This was not a meal. It was refueling. Kira scooped a handful of marrow into her own mouth. The energy hit her almost instantly, a warmth spreading through her chest, chasing away the cold ache of hunger. This was the key to their future. The calories to build a bigger brain, the fat to survive the next cold night, the power to keep moving. But the feast was brief. The scent of fresh cracked bone would travel. They had stolen from the scavengers, and the primary killer was yet to make its presence known. The sun began its slow, inevitable slide toward the west, casting long, deceiving shadows across the savanna. The clan had taken what they could, two of the largest bone segments, packed with the precious marrow. They had also secured a small, flatter slab of bone, heavy with brain matter, cracked from the skull end of the massive carcass they had abandoned. They moved with renewed vigor, the fat and protein fueling their legs and steadying their hands. Kira pushed them hard, moving them away from the kill site toward a distant cluster of fig trees, a known, though not entirely safe, temporary roost. They kept to the high, dry ground, minimizing their scent and maximizing their view of the terrain. ZF, walking point, suddenly raised his club, not in a ready stance, but as a warning to freeze. The world went silent. It was not the silence of peace, but the compressed, vacuumed quiet that precedes violence. Even the buzzards, far behind them, seemed to have paused their squabbling. Kira's eyes went wide. She scanned the ground, the bushes, the sky. Nothing. Yet the air tasted wrong. Her primal instinct, the million-year-old alarm system in her spine, screamed predator. And then she saw it. Not moving, not running, but simply there. High on a nearby termite mound, silhouetted against the sinking sun, was a colossal cat. It was not a leopard, nor a saber-toothed meganterian. Its body was sleek, its tail short, and its teeth were long, terrifying blades that projected past its lower jaw. This was a Homotherium, the scimitar cat. The cat was enormous, its low growl vibrating across the distance, too deep for hearing, but felt entirely in the chest. It was not interested in the small, bony hominids as a primary meal. It was interested in the meat they carried. The cat viewed them as overly persistent insects attempting to carry off a piece of its kill. It dropped from the mound and began a low, deliberate, confident stalk. Kira and the young male were instantly at his side, dragging him. EF was alive, conscious, but the wound was catastrophic. A deep, gaping tear that bled torrentially, soaking the dusty ground. The cat, having asserted its dominance and satisfied the first surge of its fury, stood back, panting. It did not immediately press the attack. It was a calculating predator. It had secured a heavy blow and knew the smaller creatures were now broken. It needed only to wait for the weakness and scent of blood to work their inevitable magic. Gah! Kira grunted, a gesture of frantic urgency, pointing toward the cluster of bushes where Lee and the others waited. They hauled ZF between them, stumbling, slipping on the rocks stained with his dark, arterial blood. His weight was crushing, but they dared not slow down. Lee, seeing the tragedy unfold, ran to meet them, her face contorted in a silent scream. She was clutching a large, cool leaf. They reached the thicket. Kira took the lead again. She ripped the largest leaves she could find, broad, slightly sticky ones, and began pressing them onto Zeph's wound, trying to staunch the horrific flow. The old elder male, leaning heavily on his stick, brought his own personal reserve of chewed-up root pulp, an antiseptic, bitter-tasting salve used for small cuts, now applied hopelessly to a massive trauma. The silence returned, more terrifying than before. The cat was stalking them. They could feel the invisible line closing around their refuge. Kira made the final, agonizing decision. They could not stay. If they waited until nightfall, the cat would close in, and the smell of blood would draw every scavenger for miles. They had to move even with ZF dragging behind them. She looked at ZF. He nodded, a grimace of agony replacing the nod. He was still holding the bone slab containing the brain matter, their most potent fuel. The marrow had given him the few moments of clarity needed to fight, and now to endure. They moved east, toward the river of bones, a dangerous, mile-wide, fast-flowing water source, but also the only path to the distant, protective high canyon where safety might be found. The sun was now a brilliant orange smear on the horizon, promising a dark, perilous night. The night was a tapestry of threats. Every rustle of dry grass was a stalking predator. Every snapping twig, a trap. The clan moved at a desperate crawl. EF was now supported by two others, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The constant movement caused the wound to seep, leaving a dark, slick trail on the dusty path, a signpost for any following carnivore. Kale, the child, began to whimper, and Lee, exhausted, could only press his face into her shoulder, her soft, soothing sounds, the most ancient form of communication, barely audible over the insect's nightly hum. Kira was a sentinel. Her hands were raw from dragging ZF and constantly clearing the path. Her chopper remained clenched, ready to strike, its edge now slightly dulled by impact with the Homotherium's thick shoulder. As the pre-dawn mist began to snake through the valley floor, they reached the canyon rim. Below them, a mile distant, they could hear the deep, constant roar of the River of Bones. But there was another sound, the sound of voices, or rather, the grunts and hooting calls of other hominids. Kira flattened herself behind a boulder, signaling the clan down. The other group was moving along the base of the canyon wall, heading toward the only natural crossing point, a shelf of large, flat rocks jutting out into the water. This was the second twist, a conflict not of muscle and teeth, but of competition, the rising pressure of Homo versus Australopithecus. The group below them was larger, perhaps 10 strong. They were heavier-browed, slightly less upright, and moved with a slower, more deliberate gait. They were the rock walkers, and they claimed the crossing point. Kira observed them. They carried no choppers, only rough clubs and digging sticks. They were gathered at the edge of the river, waiting for the water level to drop just slightly. They were hungry, too, their movements tense and frustrated. Two groups of hominids, both starved, both injured, both relying on a single, precarious crossing to reach safety. The tension was an electric field between them. Kira knew she could not fight them, not with Zeph's injury. She had two choices: retreat back into the open savanna where the cat waited, or wait for the rockwalkers to cross and hope they did not double back. She decided to wait, pressing the clan into the narrow, cold shadow of the rock overhang. Time was their enemy, but the cat was the greater certainty of death. They waited, silent, for nearly an hour. ZF, slipping in and out of consciousness, occasionally let out a low moan that Lee instantly smothered with her hand. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with the scent of the rushing water. Then, the world was rent by a new, catastrophic sound. Above them, on the horizon, a sudden, blinding flash of lightning cracked open the sky. The sound was immediately followed by a low, distant drumming that grew quickly to a deafening, continuous roar. The rains had begun, not a gentle shower, but a colossal, mile-wide cloudburst miles upstream. The river, already fast, was about to become a lethal torrent. The rock walkers panicked. They shouted to each other, their calls high and distressed. Their leader, a massive male with an intimidating brow, made a frantic decision: cross now or be trapped. They scrambled onto the rock shelf, beginning their perilous journey across the surging, brown water. Kira knew this was their only chance. The flood would eliminate the rockwalkers' advantage, perhaps even eliminate the rockwalkers entirely, but it also threatened to sweep them all away. Hop! Hop! Kira urged, tapping Lee's shoulder. They hauled ZF to his feet, a heavy, dead weight supported by Kira and the young male. They began the descent. It was a race against the terrifying sound of the approaching water. The rockwalkers were halfway across the crossing shelf when the first wave of the flash flood hit. It was a muddy, log-strewn wall of water that slammed into the crossing. The rockwalkers were instantly submerged, their terrified cries cut short by the churning water. Some were swept away, their bodies tumbling into the river's merciless churn. Others clung desperately to the slick, black rock, their fear a palpable thing. Kira and her clan reached the water's edge just as the main surge passed. The crossing shelf was still there, but now partially submerged and slick with mud and debris. The rockwalkers were gone, having retreated to the far bank, their crossing efforts ruined. The path was open but lethal. The water was waist-deep, moving with the brutal power of a living thing. Kira entered first, testing the submerged stone with her foot, using her club to probe for unseen holes. The cold water was a shock, but it was a cleaner scent than blood. Lee followed, Kale wrapped tightly around her neck. The child was silent now, his face a pale mask of fear, his small hands clutching his mother's damp hair. Halfway across, the young male slipped on a moss-slicked stone. He went down with a splash, pulling his hand away from ZF. ZF fell entirely into the churning water. He gasped, swallowing a mouthful of mud and water. Kira, seeing him go, released her own footing on the solid stone to grab Zeph's arm. The force of the current slammed them both hard against a submerged boulder. The pain in Zeph's thigh was an exploding agony, but the cold water helped clean the wound. Kira strained, fighting the river like a physical entity. She was strong, but Zeph's weight, combined with the current, was too much. Her feet could not find purchase. She was losing him. Then, the final, desperate twist. Kale, weakened by hunger and now terrified by the water, lost his grip on Lee's neck. He slipped, falling from her grasp into the brown, frothing water. Lee screamed. A sound that was pure animal, pure mother. A sound that sliced through the roar of the flood. She let go of the stone, diving into the current after her child. Kira's focus split. ZF was still slipping away, his eyes closing. The child was being carried downstream by the current. Kira made the choice of the leader, the greater good. She released ZF, letting the young male and the elder take the slack, and lunged toward Kale. She swam, not like a practiced creature of the water, but with desperate, thrashing primate strength. A brief, explosive burst of energy driven by her recent dose of marrow fat. She reached Kale just as he was swept past a small, stable rock. She snatched him, holding his small, soaked body above the surface, pressing him into her shoulder. She had the child, but she was now downstream. She scrambled onto the rock, clinging, gasping for air. Looking back, she saw ZF still alive, being hauled by the last two members of the clan onto the far bank, the safe bank. Lee was with them, pointing frantically downstream. Kira could see them. They had survived the crossing, but she and Kale were still trapped on a tiny island of rock in the middle of a flooding river. They were alone, separated, and the canyon wall loomed, unforgiving. The cold was debilitating. Kale was shivering uncontrollably. Kira pulled him close, her powerful arms warming him with her own body heat, shielding him from the driving rain. She looked across the 50 yards of raging water. On the far bank, her people were huddled beneath a meager rock face. They had survived, but they were incomplete. Kira focused on the far bank. They were waiting. They were watching. She took a deep breath, scanning the flotsam in the river. A large, gnarled tree root, half submerged, was moving slowly, caught in an eddy. It was a risk. If she missed it, they would both be swept away. She let the root approach. As it came within range, she pushed Kale onto the rock, instructing him with a severe gesture to cling tightly. Then, she leaped, catching the root with a desperate, two-handed grip. The root bucked violently, pulling her downstream. Her arms were stretched, her muscles screaming with the effort. But the root was a life raft. It slowly, agonizingly, carried her across the last 10 yards toward the far bank. When her feet hit the mud of the shore, she pulled herself up, exhausted, and stumbled onto the bank. A moment later, the young male, showing an astonishing display of courage, re-entered the water to retrieve Kale. He made it back to the island, took the child, and carried him, screaming, through the current to Lee's waiting embrace. Kira, soaking and trembling, joined her clan beneath the overhang. They were all there, wounded, exhausted, but together. The meat had powered the mind, and the mind had powered the rescue. The canyon wall provided a shallow, dry overhang, a safe haven from the driving rain that still lashed the savanna. It was a place of temporary, absolute safety. Kira knelt beside ZF. His wound was shocking, a deep, jagged gash that would cripple him for days, perhaps weeks. The bitter elder applied his root pulp once more, covering the wound with a pad of clean, chewed fiber. ZF ate it slowly, consciously, his eyes closed. There was nothing more to do but wait, and rely on the primal engine of life. The clan was cold, soaked, and traumatized, but they were alive. Kira had saved the last of their prize. She pulled the remaining chunk of brain matter bone from her small sling. Brain matter was the most potent fuel of all, soft, rich, and high in fats essential for the rapidly expanding hominid cortex. It was the food that made them them. She broke off a small piece with her dull chopper and gave it to ZF. He ate it slowly, consciously, his eyes closed. The intense burst of energy, the fatty oils, the dense protein, was a chemical injection of hope directly into his blood. Kira then divided the remaining piece among Lee and the other adults. Kale, resting against Lee, was given a final, tiny lick of the fat. They ate in a huddled circle, the shared nourishment a silent, profound ritual. There was no fire. Controlled fire was a luxury for later generations. But there was the warmth of bodies pressed together, the rhythmic, steady breathing of the clan, and the silent, deep understanding of their interdependence. The small, successful act of theft and the desperate unity of the crossing had secured their future for at least one more day. Kira watched Kale. The child was quiet now. His shivering subsided, his eyes fixed on the rain falling outside their shelter. He had faced the terrifying, primal threat of the flood and survived. He would remember the panic, the cold, and the sudden, resolute strength of his mother and the clan leader. This memory, this trauma, was the first seed of human history. The canyon wall provided a shallow, dry overhang, a safe haven from the driving rain that still lashed the savanna. It was a place of temporary, absolute safety. Kira knelt beside ZF. His wound was shocking, a deep, jagged gash that would cripple him for days, perhaps weeks. The bitter elder applied his root pulp once more, covering the wound with a pad of clean, chewed fiber. ZF ate it slowly, consciously, his eyes closed. There was nothing more to do but wait, and rely on the primal engine of life. The clan was cold, soaked, and traumatized, but they were alive. Kira had saved the last of their prize. She pulled the remaining chunk of brain matter bone from her small sling. Brain matter was the most potent fuel of all, soft, rich, and high in fats essential for the rapidly expanding hominid cortex. It was the food that made them them. She broke off a small piece with her dull chopper and gave it to ZF. He ate it slowly, consciously, his eyes closed. The intense burst of energy, the fatty oils, the dense protein, was a chemical injection of hope directly into his blood. Kira then divided the remaining piece among Lee and the other adults. Kale, resting against Lee, was given a final, tiny lick of the fat. They ate in a huddled circle, the shared nourishment a silent, profound ritual. There was no fire. Controlled fire was a luxury for later generations. But there was the warmth of bodies pressed together, the rhythmic, steady breathing of the clan, and the silent, deep understanding of their interdependence. The small, successful act of theft and the desperate unity of the crossing had secured their future for at least one more day. Kira watched Kale. The child was quiet now. His shivering subsided, his eyes fixed on the rain falling outside their shelter. He had faced the terrifying, primal threat of the flood and survived. He would remember the panic, the cold, and the sudden, resolute strength of his mother and the clan leader. This memory, this trauma, was the first seed of human history. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the canyon walls in a glorious, golden light, Kira took out her tools. She cleaned the blood and mud from her stone chopper, examining the chipped edge. The tool was the architect of their survival. The Homotherium had fangs and claws. The hyenas had crushing jaws. The river had the power of the flood. But she had the stone, the externalized extension of her hand, the power to break the strongest barrier in the natural world. Bone. She took a hammerstone, a perfect, smooth sphere of quartz she had carried for years, and began the intricate process of resharpening her chopper. The systematic percussion, the careful selection of the striking angle, the focused effort to remove a single, clean flake. This was the highest art of the clan. Tap, tap, tssh. A perfect, sharp flake split from the core, landing in the dry sand. Kira picked it up. It was a perfect, small, crescent-shaped knife, sharp enough to cut the thick hide of a new kill, or to trim the protective leaves around Zeph's wound. This flake, small and insignificant to the world, was a testament to the evolutionary path they were on. Kira is seated, focused entirely on percussion flaking, using a hammerstone to precisely resharpen her chopper. The clan watched her in silence. They were not simply observing a woman sharpening a stone. They were watching the genesis of their myth. They saw the leader, fueled by the rich marrow, forging the weapon that would allow them to persist against the colossal, terrifying forces of their world. Zeph woke, his eyes finding Kira. He lifted his hand slowly, painfully, and offered the bone slab, now almost entirely clean of its brain matter. Kira nodded, acknowledging the offering. The bone was returned, a symbol of the shared sacrifice and survival. Lee pressed Kale closer, the child's small hand reaching out to touch the smooth, cool stone of the canyon wall. They were survivors. They were the inheritors of the earth, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they understood the necessity of cooperation, the value of fat, and the power of the sharp, intelligently struck stone. The river was calming, the crossing now possible. The sun was rising, promising warmth and drying wind. Kira rose, her body aching, her heart heavy with the weight of the last 24 hours, but her mind clear and resolute. She pointed to the high, grassy slopes beyond the canyon, a land untouched by the recent drought, a land where new hunting possibilities lay. She turned and led the way, her clan following in a tight, resilient column. Zeph, supported carefully, was still with them. The young male was chastened but hardened. Lee carried the future. The journey was endless. The dangers were absolute. But they had the fuel of the ancestors, the marrow, and the technology of the future, the stone. They had earned another day of life, another chapter in the vast, silent epic of humanity's ascent. The great myth continued, one desperate step at a time, toward the rising sun.